attended council hearings in person. You tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now, you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voiced person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications as the council. You might also know me as our voice on social media at Council of DC. Today, we are once again thrilled to welcome back Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker. Thank you so much, Councilmember, for taking time out of your day.
Thank you for having me.
We have 2 or 3 topics that we're going to tackle today, and one is particularly timely. It is council recess, which I think is a broadly misunderstood concept. I think most people find out about council recess and they say, oh, I'd like a 2-month summer vacation, which needless to say, it is not. So why don't you talk a little bit about, now that you have a couple council recesses under your belt, what council recess means to you and why you think it's a valuable institution.
So
assuming you do.
Assuming I do. I do think it's helpful for the council to reset, to catch up on work, to pause before the fall onslaught, as it will. Recess is essentially a period of time where there are no hearings, there are no meetings formally by the council. That doesn't mean, though, that there isn't work happening. And so there are many teams in the building every day, every week during the recess. And it's, as I mentioned, a time to reset for the council formally. As a ward-based council member, I'm still having public meetings. I'm still joining community groups, and my team is in the building every day of the week. What we're also coming up on is the end of the council period. And so December will mark the end of this council period. And so what I anticipate will happen between September and December is just a fury of meetings and calls and sessions, just making sure that we can get as much work done and completed before the end of the council period. For those that may not be familiar, all legislation that is not yet passed and committed by the end of the council period is essentially sent back, and we would have to reintroduce that work. And so again, there is going to be a bit of overtime, if you will. And so this recess allows committees to kind of catch up, catch their breath, plan, and create a process by which we will be able to hit our goals by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think back to the old variety shows where there were people that would spin plates on sticks, you know, and once one started to wiggle, you had to go spin that, and you get that one going, you have to go back to another one. The council not in recess feels like that to me. Yes. You know, is that there's everything is a priority and you're constantly just keeping things going. And the pleasure of recess is if you needed to, I don't know, bake a cake while you were spinning those plates on sticks, it'd be impossible because like you don't have enough focused time to work on a different project. And that is what recess gives, I think, both the council members and the staff, is you can get off the treadmill and you can do stuff that's important, but not urgent.
Yep. And I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that rest is essential for everyone and to our line of work as well. And so recess also allows council staff to take a breather. As you may know, we go from performance oversight into budget oversight into budget all over the course of about 6 months. And it is rapid fire. And people are working around the clock, and it's grueling. And so I know for staffers, especially with children, that is an important period where they're able to take a couple of weeks to take that family vacation to catch their breath. And that allows them to recharge, to come back in the fall to do it all over again in preparation for next year. So I also think it's fair to say there is time for rest. It is not vacation necessarily for everybody all at once. But as you mentioned, it's time for different priorities to be focused on, for people to take a breather and for the council to reset.
Yeah, I think that's one of the joys of the present day is the fact that we're all acknowledging mental health is a thing.
Yes.
You know, when I was growing up, you didn't talk about that at all. And the fact that it's not healthy and no one wins an award for working the hardest and constantly being on the razor's edge, barely getting everything done. You know, so I appreciate you making the point that it's not, sometimes we kind of explain away the concept of recess the way I did, but I appreciate you kind of looking at it straight on and saying, we do need time when we're not under constant pressure.
That's right.
Yeah. So, so are there any particular targets or issue areas or projects that you or your staff are using this particular recess to look at?
Absolutely. We're focusing on a number of things. One, there were a number of big budget wins that we secured. For instance, there is a study that the Office of Planning will do of Rhode Island Avenue. I've met with DEMPED and the Office of Planning to kind of map out that work that will get started in October at the beginning of the fiscal year. And so this downtime of sorts allows us to prepare and look ahead. There's also much work happening on the ground in terms of communities, making sure that we're present, supporting our young people with a backpack giveaway at the end of the month. And we're also planning for Ward 5 Day. So you may have remembered me talking about this before. It's a age-old tradition here in Ward 5 where it's going to be all hands on deck, all community fun field day at Turkey Thicket. It will be in the end of September, and this recess period allows us to turn the focus more on this community-focused event. And over the next few weeks, we'll be meeting regularly to put the finishing touches on that. So that's just some of what we've been doing as a team over this recess to make use of it, but also plan ahead for the future.
So tell me a bit more about the Rhode Island Avenue study. Is that an economic redevelopment study? Is that kind of all in 360-degree government look at the corridor?
Yeah, no, I tell people all the time that we must support downtown, and there's been a lot of discussion around ensuring that we can push back on the office vacancies that are continuing to climb downtown. We must also focus on our corridors in the heart of our city. So Rhode Island Avenue is one of those corridors. It cuts through the heart of Ward 5. Thousands of commuters travel along that corridor, and it needs a lot of attention, love, and support. It is underdeveloped, if you will, in the sense that we don't necessarily want high rises all across that corridor, but we want basic amenities like grocery stores and more coffee shops and sit-down restaurants. We want it to be more inviting. There is opportunity for perhaps there to be more residential development along the corridor. In fact, when you look at Maryland, so Ward 5 abuts Maryland. Rhode Island Avenue is a thoroughfare that will take you through the city, through Ward 5 into Maryland. Immediately on the other side of Eastern Avenue, when you cross into Maryland, you will see an arts district, a thriving arts district that stops immediately at DC's door and Ward 5's door. And how great would it be if we could continue that type of theme and development into the city? And so what I was able to do during this last budget cycle is secure funds for the Office of Planning to commence a long study of the corridor from about 12th and Rhode Island to the boundary of the city to identify opportunities for development, with the goal that they will then come back in the spring, share feedback and share what they've learned. And then in future budgets, I would be able to advocate and invest in the corridor with the hope that over time, we will see major development along Rhode Island Avenue that will be beneficial to residents, that would attract new business, that would be electric for the city, and help us meet our goals. And so we're well on our way. As I mentioned, I met with the Office of Planning, and they will kick off their work when funds become available beginning in October. And we are expecting to hear from them sometime around April or May next year to see what they've identified.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that there's sort of a grand rebalancing of our city going on, that for the longest time, like literally no one lived downtown, in the heart of downtown, you know, and there was the stretch where downtown shut down at night. You know, it was busy during the day with office workers, then it was quiet at night and no one lived down there. We fixed the first part of that. We have a 24-hour downtown, but we're realizing we need more residents downtown. So the office to residential conversion is helping take care of that. So we're kind of bringing the neighborhood aspect to downtown, but we don't want to miss out on the fact that we want to bring a downtown element to the neighborhoods, in the sense of we want to have a mix of office, retail, and residential.
And to that, and if I could jump in to that,
yeah, please.
We don't want residents downtown just for the sake of having residents downtown. In fact, I don't know if that's the catalyst. As many know, after the pandemic, our world changed, and many companies and businesses realized that the work that they do, they could do it virtually, and or they could do it with less square footage of office space. And so if you've heard the mayor, or if you've heard the president of the United States encouraging businesses or even the federal government to return to work, it's because downtowns across our country, including here in DC, are suffering. And when downtowns suffer, city budgets suffer, local restaurants, local doctors' offices, and the like suffer because traffic is down. And that is why we are now having to rethink what will the future of DC's downtown look like, both in terms of its use, its vibrancy, and as a result, we've concluded that we want to convert some of those old office buildings into residential opportunities, to revive downtown, to increase traffic, and to make it more viable for our city. A lion's share of the district's budget comes from tax revenue generated in our downtown area. That's why we are focusing on sending residents downtown and or these conversions. We also learned at the height of the pandemic that the neighborhoods that fared better were these hybrid communities, like a Navy Yard or like the Wharf, where you're seeing a mix of retail and residential and some office space. And I think of Union Market in Ward 5, which is a model of sorts, where you're seeing this mix of residential, retail, and business. And what we are now realizing is there are opportunities across the district where we can replicate that model, where we bring that trifecta of sorts. And that is what I'm hoping we can do along Rhode Island. Not necessarily trying to replicate downtown, but to say, how can we make this a more vibrant, sustainable corridor for residents to enjoy, but also for the district's long-term sustainability.
Right. And there's a role for government when you kind of analyze each neighborhood based on how are you doing on residential, how are you doing on commercial, how are you doing on office. There's an opportunity for the government to goose whichever of those three columns is lagging in any particular neighborhood. So downtown, there's some incentives for residential conversion because we want downtown hopefully to be a bit more balanced. Yes. And to your point, Rhode Island Avenue, some commercial development, some office, some Hyattsville style funky nonprofit offices or arts offices, respecting the character of the neighborhood, but trying to make sure you have a better balance in those three categories is a good role for government.
Yep.
What other budget wins do you want to highlight from the last cycle? It was an interesting budget cycle because going in, it was very doom and gloom. that it was just going to be an incredibly difficult budget cycle. And I know obviously there were some tough decisions, there were cuts made, but knock on wood, it seems like what came in as a fairly aggressively cutting budget came out of the council a bit softer.
Yes.
So speak to this cycle more generally, and then we'll come back to Ward 5 wins.
I like how you framed that. I'll be more pointed. When the council received the budget from the mayor, it was in many ways an austerity budget. There were many cuts. There was a lot of pain, and the narrative around it was that DC's revenues were not as strong as previously projected, again, in part because of what was happening downtown. And therefore, we were going to have to slash and cut vital programs for expecting mothers and our children and communities, and namely in wards 5, 7, and 8. And I joined my colleagues in pushing back on that framing and that narrative, and to think outside of the box to see how can we help meet the district's needs while advancing a responsible budget and keeping vital programming. I think the council landed, for the most part, in the right place as it relates to that, because I know that the vibrancy and the sustainability of our city is directly connected to how well we support our most vulnerable neighbors, including our young people and their families. There were several wins that I was proud of that I championed in this budget, including the work on Rhode Island Avenue. We also secured funding for the creation of a Ward 5 business center. What DMPIT will be doing over the next year is studying how we might bring to life a Ward 5 business center. This will directly catalyze entrepreneurs and the creation of new businesses in Ward 5 for the benefit of them and their families, but more so for the benefit of the district, and it's a win-win. We were able to secure more safe streets investments with DDOT now being tasked to study Michigan Avenue, which is another one of our dangerous thoroughfares in Ward 5, to explore how can we make that roadway safer. There were critical investments in our schools. All of our school modernizations in Ward 5 are still on track. Our recreation center redevelopments are still on track. We were able to secure significant historic investments for the LGBTQ community. There were 20 housing vouchers dedicated for LGBTQ residents, and we haven't had dedicated vouchers for the LGBTQ community now in 2 years. And so it was among the 3 requests that I made of my colleagues, of which I'm proud that they honored. The second was a direct investment in the LGBTQ Center in Shaw, which will serve as a refuge for neighbors, LGBTQ residents in the city, where they can receive support, housing, job training, and just a safe place where they can connect with people that experience life similar to them. And there was an investment to make the LGBTQ office more independent. It will still be under the purview of the mayor, but it will have its own standalone budget book and therefore greater oversight and transparency, which is a win for our community because we will be able to see where investments are going via the LGBTQ community, and therefore be able to better hold district leaders accountable. There are so many more wins, but I would be remiss if I did not tout the critical investment in the child tax credit. As a former teacher, I've learned that you're never supposed to have a favorite student. And so all of the wins that I'm talking about, I'm very proud of, and they speak to and work for critical communities in our city. But I must say, I was proudest when that investment came down for the child tax credit, because it's something I fought so hard for. The child tax credit was the first significant legislation I introduced as a freshman council member. It is mirrored off of the national child tax credit, which we know slashed child poverty rates in the country when it was introduced at the height of the pandemic. And what our child tax credit here in the district will do when it is implemented will give families fully refundable tax credit. That means money when you file your taxes for children under a certain age. And so we essentially made a down payment in the budget for families with children under the age of 6. So if you have a child under the age of 6, when you file your taxes, you will now get about a $500 credit per child. So for a single mom with 3 children, perhaps 3 children under 6, that would be $1,500 for that mom or that family. What we are hoping to do in this coming budget cycle and in future years is scale that investment and scale the age for eligibility so that we can get up to 17 years old of age and hopefully get that investment closer to $1,500 or $2,000. So when it's fully at scale, what we would be saying to families is that the district is directly investing in our children, because we know when we raise the economic floor for children and families, we all benefit. Children respond better academically, they respond better in terms of their health, and they respond better in terms of their long-term outcomes, which is a win-win for those children and their families, but also the district. So I'll stop there. Those are just some of the wins I'm proudest of through this budget. But I think safe to say Ward 5 won pretty big in this budget, and we will continue to fight to protect those investments, but to make sure we can go further in future years.
Yeah, and on the child tax credit, I think it, the success of it on the federal level has been very clear, and I think it goes against when you're in public policy, sometimes there's a tendency to over program and to get very specific. And we only want this to go to fund certain foods that are the most nutritious, and you can only spend this on X, Y, or Z. And there was a bit of a fingers crossed moment with the child tax credit, where it is giving cash to people who need cash and trusting their wisdom on how best to spend it. And there's a lot of negative stereotypes that were brought up by opponents saying, oh God, this money will be tragically misspent. And instead we found that it was one of the most effective anti-poverty measures in decades, because it did give people the ability to spend as they needed.
It was and it has been the single most effective anti-poverty program implemented in this country in over 50 years. The single most effective program. And you're absolutely right. This country and our city, for many respects, we give incentives and money away to a lot of people. In fact, more money goes to high earning income individuals and companies than lower income individuals. But you're right, that stigma that if you give low income individuals money, they're going to misuse it. They're going to go buy clothes or new sneakers. What we see time and time again is when we meet residents' basic needs, more often than not, they use that money to put a roof over their heads, to put food on the table, to support their families. And it is a recognition of around how our economic forces are making meeting one's basic needs very difficult. And so I'm glad you're lifting that up. The child tax credit, again, we are hoping and expecting that it will do what it did at the federal level here in DC to slash child poverty rates and to serve as a buoy for district families. And we're not paying attention to those stereotypes that wrongly suggest that when you give vulnerable residents more money, they misuse it, because we've seen even in DC with our pilots of various guaranteed income programs that when we've given low-income residents money, more often than not, they use it in the right way. And I'll give a specific data point. The Hearts, I forget the specific name of the program, but the guaranteed income pilot that invests in moms from wards 5, 7, and 8 that has now run for 3 consecutive years, where moms across the city are receiving investments of $500 or more. Year after year, we have found that the program has been overwhelmingly successful, and that more than, I think, 90% of participants are meeting outcomes. And it is, again, just yet another proof point of how we need to do more to reach our most vulnerable residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And another win, which I believe was in the budget, or the Budget Support Act, or I might just be misremembering, was I know you focused hard on safe passage to schools.
Yes.
And getting, I believe it was the Brooklyn Metro included in the focus areas for that. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because public safety is on everyone's mind as always.
Public safety remains a top priority for me. We are proud that rates of violence are declining across the city as well as in Ward 5. In fact, the 5th District Police Department saw the steepest declines across the city. I would like to think that's because of the innovative approaches of our commander and the work that he's leading across our community. But we know MPD can't do it alone, that we need other tools in the toolbox. And the Safe Passage program is one of those tools. Essentially, what it does is it designates a territory where students are likely to traverse going to and from school, whether that's a metro station or a stretch of land between usually a student's pathway to and from school. The Brooklyn Metro Station is one of those areas. We unfortunately saw a homicide of a young person earlier this year. Brooklyn, while it is a relatively quiet community, it has seen spikes of violence over the last few years. And we know that the Brooklyn Metro is one of the busiest metro stations in the city. And so I made the call. It was a fight, but I'm happy to say that we were able to win and secure an investment to establish, beginning in October, a new safe passage territory that will hover over the Brooklyn Metro Station. That will provide dedicated personnel who will be there in the morning for about 3 hours and in the afternoon for about 3 hours, making sure there's extra eyes and ears as students are traveling to and through and from the Brooklyn Metro Station. They will make regular reports. That report data is funneled up to our Deputy Mayor of Public Safety and Engagement. And there are other resources that are therefore triggered based on what those teams are finding. I know some people are skeptical, I'll be frank, of our violence interruption programs and the Safe Passage program. I'm by no ways fooled into thinking it is a panacea for the problems that we're seeing in the city. But as I mentioned earlier, it has proven itself as a vital tool in the toolbox, as there are a number of incidents that safe passage workers have stopped. I'm thinking of reports near our KIPP College Prep campus where their safe passage workers saved a young person's life by intervening early before a situation can escalate. And so we know this is a proven program. It works in tandem with other community supports. And we're proud to have this vital resource in Ward 5 to keep our young people safe.
Definitely. I figured you'd want a chance to mention
Yes.
that. Okay, well, I think we are coming up on the end of our time. So we're going to pivot to the fun round. And this is a bit more of a think piece. If we were trying to craft the perfect council member, and you could pull traits from your colleagues, could even be past council members if something comes to mind, kind of like a reverse Frankenstein, like, you know, tell me some of the traits you would pull from colleagues, past or present, and put into a perfect council member and be like, wow, this council member is going to be a dynamo because they're going to have the, you know, blah, 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 the intelligence of blah, 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 the sense of humor of blah, blah, blah. Give us some thoughts about traits you'd pull from your colleagues.
Yeah, I would say in no particular order. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, starting with some current members. A council member, especially a ward-based council member, needs to wear many hats. They need to be community facing. They need to be a legislator. They need to be zeroed in on oversight. And in fact, I actually think the ward-based council members have the much harder job than at-large council members, but we'll talk about that another day. So on that community-facing part, I think Councilmember Trayon White is a good model of what it looks like to roll up your sleeve and be on the ground in communities with your people as incidents are rising. So that would be one trait. I'm thinking of former Councilmember Mary Che and her hyper focus on the environment. I think just given what our communities and our city and our country are facing, we certainly need and could use a little bit more focus on the environment. I'm thinking about former Councilmember Alyssa Silverman and her dogged focus on oversight. If we need more of that. We need more people that are willing to ruffle feathers, to push against the machine, to ask tough questions, to lean in. I think of Councilmember Henderson and her obsession with numbers and data. And the reason why I say that is, it's one thing to have a good idea. It's another thing to be able to back that idea up with the data and have data-driven legislation, data-driven oversight. I think of Councilmember McDuffie and his focus on Native Washingtonians and making sure that we build a more just DC, not leaving Black folk behind, not leaving the folk who built this city. I think of Councilmember Louis George, and who's proven that she's willing to stand alone on issues that she cares about, and be brave enough to stand alone if it calls for that. And I'll call out one more. I'm just thinking randomly, and I would just say Councilmember Bonds, a council member that's focused on our seniors. I can always count on Councilmember Bonds of evoking the interests, the needs of our seniors. And I think there, for a host of reasons, we do a good job of focusing on young people. I am very passionate about young people as a former educator. We don't do as good of a job, I think, as a city and as a council focused on our seniors. And so I think that's an essential trait of having a council member that can think of both of those bookends and thinking about our seniors and keeping them at the center. So I'll stop there, but those are just some of the traits I would want in a rock star council member.
Gotcha. And no one ever answers the second part, but maybe you'll be the first one to step up to the plate. If you wanted to make a terrible council member, what traits would you pull from colleagues, past or present, and put into that really bad? This is a chance to roast your colleagues in a small way.
I won't, and yeah, I'll plead the
Chairman Mendelson's fashion sense.
Yeah, I would plead throw that on that one, but I would say the worst council member would have to be someone that didn't choose a good breakfast for the council breakfasts. So for people watching or listening, council members are often in charge for, choosing a restaurant that we're going to share for council breakfasts. So I would think the worst council member would be someone that just went to a pretty awful spot. I think that's a pretty safe answer.
Yeah, exactly. Or just the one that forgot to show up with breakfast in the first place.
Yes.
Because you to your point of being a rock star council member, no one's more of a rock star council member than when you show up with the different, interesting, plentiful, tasty breakfast.
That's right. I will say though, to make a little bit of news, I think we need to start noticing those breakfasts and making them more open to the public. So I know we've received some complaints from the community. It started, I think, as an informal connection opportunity for council members, but now it's turned into an arena for robust debate on some of the most sophisticated and complex issues facing our city. And so because of that, I just want to register that I think we need to open up that breakfast and make it more transparent for residents.
That's fair. That makes sense to me. Okay, well, I think we are out of time for this session. We have one more topic we might come back to in a future interview if you're game. But for now, let me just remind listeners to subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search under Hearing the Council. Thanks again for joining us, listeners. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio at 96.3 on your FM HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you again, Councilmember Parker. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And I now have a podcast too, but you still have the best podcast in the Wilson building.
Yeah, I saw you're up to like 14 episodes or something.
Yes, we're pushing.
I'm up at 90, but I've had 10 years. So
Yes.
but you're coming for me.
Yes.
I feel the heat.
You're a good model. Thanks, Josh.
All right. Thanks, Councilmember. Take care.